Side.
Yep.
A few less fireworks, I hope.
All
Golly.
right, everyone, it is 6:30 now, and today is Monday, July 6th, 2020, and today's council workshop, and we'll have our 7th City Council meeting held via online conferencing. All City Council members and City staff are participating from remote locations. Please allow one person to speak at a time. I will call on every member to make sure you have had an opportunity to speak, and votes will be taken by roll call. I will now ask the city clerk to start our roll call, please.
Okay, Mayor Guerrero.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Stremler.
Here.
Councillor Farmer.
Here.
Councillor Henry. Councillor Restucci.
Here.
Councillor Hicks.
Here.
Councillor Broersma.
Here.
Okay, I'm gonna I think everybody's unmuted and you guys just mute yourselves on your end. City Manager Casey.
Here.
City Clerk Renteria, I am here. Finance Director Alba.
She is on vacation this week. She was thinking she might try to call in if possible, but is planning for her to be excused.
Fire Chief Anderson. Police Chief Escalera.
I saw he's muted at the moment, but he is. I see him on the. There he is.
Police Chief
Yeah,
Escalera.
I'm here. Yes.
Okay. Public Works Director Fisher. Public Works Director Fisher.
Here.
And I believe we have our attorneys, Jessica and Eric Ferguson, with us.
Here.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for joining us, Jessica.
Thank you for having me.
There he is.
So it sounds like the only council member we don't have is Councilor Henry. Is that correct, Jackie?
Yes, that's correct. I haven't heard from him.
Okay, neither have I. So we'll hold off towards the end of the meeting, see if he calls in. If not, we'll go ahead and put it to a vote, see if council wants to excuse him.
Hello? Can nobody hear me?
Councilor Henry?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Are you?
Okay. I've been here the whole time.
All right, excellent. So we won't mark you as absent then. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, so up next we have our active agenda, which is going to be the parking and vehicle ordinance, and this is for discussion only. And Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll provide a brief introduction and then turn over the bulk of the presentation to the representatives from the city attorney's office, Mr. Ferguson and Eric Ferguson and Jessica. The initial impetus for this discussion came several months ago from council members interested in taking a look at our existing parking and vehicle ordinances and how they apply to circumstances that have arisen in parts of town, especially downtown, where a number of homeless individuals using their vehicles essentially as their primary residence have begun parking in the city's free and open public parking lot downtown. We've had extensive engagement with code enforcement and monitoring by law enforcement as well as to some of the activities. However, there's been kind of a shifting legal landscape around the regulation of activities by homeless individuals that has arisen in very recent times. And so we felt that it would be helpful to council to hear from the city attorneys about how our current ordinances work and apply, how the recent case law affects and intersects with that, and then some of the options and potential adjustments or refinements that might help us achieve the council's policy objectives, and then basically then open it for council questions and dialogue around direction or guidance that could be taken back by the attorneys to work on potential recommended revisions or adjustments to current city ordinances. This afternoon, as kind of a point of departure for the discussion, city attorneys provided us a brief memo, which we emailed out to council members, and then we'll also be showing on the screen here. Jackie will share her screen shortly, but it provides a brief overview of two recent cases that are relevant to the discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to Eric and Jessica to carry forward the conversation. Departure for the discussion.
Hi, this is Jessica.
Provided us,
So if you reference this memo here, you'll see that two of the most... Yes.
I'm sorry. Somebody's got a lag time on their playback, so I was hearing both my voice in echo over Jessica's voice, and I'm not sure. Might encourage council members during the presentation and others to go ahead and mute yourselves so that the playback doesn't interfere with or cover over the remarks. And I'll mute myself as well.
Thanks for that reminder. In 2018, the Ninth Circuit ruled both in Martin v. Boise and on the Homestead
No, we
Act.
still have a hot mic somewhere.
Yeah, I can hear that.
Might encourage council members during the presentation and others.
I only hear it when Jessica speaks. No one else's mics are going off on my screen here.
Thanks for that reminder. In 2018, the Ninth Circuit. I'm still hearing it. Are you guys? Martin v. Boise.
Yeah, I'm still getting feedback.
Yeah, same here. I'm still getting feedback.
Should I just blaze ahead?
I only hear it when Jessica speaks. No one else's mics are going off on my screen here.
Okay, so Martin v. Boise is a recent case just from 2018, and that is where the Ninth Circuit ruled that the enforcement of ordinances that prohibit sleeping or camping on public property against homeless individuals is unconstitutional when those individuals do not have a meaningful alternative, such as a shelter space. And so one option that a city might have is to decide as a matter of policy if it wants to create a system that could track the number of available shelter beds and the number of homeless individuals in its jurisdiction. If the city opts not to track that information, it could become vulnerable to a legal challenge if it enforces those ordinances that prohibit
I'm
camping.
sorry, Mr. City Manager, Mr. Mayor, this is not working. I can't hear her with the background.
Will you be able to call in maybe with a separate line? Because I think you might be logged into our website and there's a lag on the recording, the YouTube video maybe that's on our city website. I'm thinking that might be something to try to get rid of or try calling back maybe and see if that gets rid of the feedback or background noise that it's your same voice.
Okay, do you still hear it now?
No.
I think we're okay now.
Okay, yeah, I think I was logged in on the website. Martin v. Boise prohibits the enforcement of ordinances that prohibit sleeping or camping on public property against homeless individuals if those individuals don't have a meaningful alternative for a place to sleep, such as a shelter space or a legal place to camp. And this could violate the 8th Amendment, depending on whether it punishes a person for lacking the means to live out the universal and unavoidable consequences of being human. One option that a city can decide to use just is as a matter of policy if it wants to create a system that tracks the number of available shelter beds and the number of homeless individuals that it has. And if a city decides not to track this information, it could become vulnerable to a legal challenge if it enforces ordinances that violate the 8th Amendment. Cities can also enact ordinances that prohibit long-term parking in specific areas and of parking of vehicles that aren't in working condition, but they just can't prohibit long-term parking everywhere, for example. Some cities are choosing to include suspended enforcement provisions, which only prohibit that type of camping when there are no alternative shelters available. The Homestead Act, which came out of King County also in 2018, stated that an individual who resides in a vehicle might actually have homestead rights in that vehicle. This act protects a person's residence from judgment and liens. And even though cars and trucks traditionally aren't thought of as residences, the court noted in this case that a homestead can consist of real or personal property that the owner uses as a residence. And in this case, the court ruled that the impound itself was legal, but the impound fee was not. And so it should have been exempt under the Homestead Act. And this was a Superior Court decision, so it is not yet binding on Washington local governments, but it is currently pending in the Court of Appeals. And so that's just a brief overview of the lay of the land right now to get you all started on your discussion.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And we'll go down the list of council members to ask questions or comments on this parking and vehicle ordinance. And we'll start with Councilmember Restucci. Councilor Restucci, I think you're still muted if you're trying to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was double muted. I'm going to reserve my questions for later, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to hear what some of my other colleagues have to say first.
Sounds good. Up next, Councilmember Farmer.
I've got a list. I have been contacted by several citizens of Sunnyside whose either business or home abuts the parking lot next on the 5th Street. I think that's kind of where this whole thing is going. I just want to give you a list of the complaints that I have received. There is human feces being thrown over the fences. There has been a great increase in business break-ins. They never had this problem till this problem arose. Not saying that these are the people that are doing it, but they never had this problem until we have this problem. They are visually watching what they think to be drug deals. When somebody drives up and you shake hands and you take and put your hand back and you get in your car and you leave, that's probably a drug deal. They're seeing that all of the time. They are accosting merchants and citizens at their back doors. I had one merchant tell me that they were afraid to even go out and empty the garbage because they might run into one of them. There is trash just being piled up outside these vehicles, and it is blowing all over into other people's parking lots and other people's businesses. These cars are unlicensed. They are junk cars. They're not cars that could even be put on the road. This is asking our citizens to put up with stuff that nobody in this town should have to put up with. It is bothering their constitutional rights to a safe, clean environment. There is environmental impacts all over that yard now with human feces and oil and antifreeze running all over the parking lot. I don't know why we have to allow these type of illegal conditions to run rampant in that parking lot. No place else in this town can one of those cars be parked along the street without the city issuing a citation and picking them up and towing them off. I don't want this to become another Chad. and it very well could be. I think we as a city have to protect the tax-paying people of this community against the conditions that they're having to put up with. I drove by there Sunday, and I was appalled. And I would ask every council member tonight or tomorrow morning, drive by and see what these merchants and these neighbors, these citizens of Sunnyside are having to live with. That's all I have for right now.
Okay, thank you. Up next, we have Deputy Mayor Stremler. Questions or comments?
I have a comment. Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I believe Toppenish, I heard the word shelter. I believe Toppenish has a shelter, and Yakima, of course, does. And what my understanding is that they can be asked if they want to go to a shelter, and if they do, that they are transported to a shelter. So I really don't think the answer is for us to add a shelter. If we can transport them to a shelter that's within reasonable driving distance, and they want to go, that's something we should be doing. And I would think that if they don't want to go to a shelter, that kind of puts the ball in the other court. Then we need to start taking action, and maybe we need to move the cars to different parts of town so we all get a chance to experience this. Maybe move some up on the hill, let them pitch a tent on the street on the hill. Let some people up there experience this, and maybe city would take a different view of it. That's all I have.
Thank you. Up next, we have Councilor Hicks.
Yeah, my question would be I know next to the business and stuff is not going to work for anybody. Do we have an empty lot somewhere they could go if we can't get them out of here?
Mr. City Manager, do you know of anything?
Apologies, I needed to get unmuted there. Empty city-owned parcels, there are a few. Some function, there's another parking lot, basically in the block occupied by the fire station, and on the backside of that. I'd have to check with Public Works Director as to any other city-owned vacant parcels where there's gravel or paved area where parking where the vehicles could be moved to. But again, that was part of the goal of the discussion, was to identify some of these questions so that we can research and get back to you. So we'll make sure to add that to the.
Right. I mean, ideally, I don't want them there, but that's me. I mean, they're downtrodden. I understand. If we could transport them to a shelter, that would be great. But of course, you're always going to get the ones that don't want to. Look at Yakima, and they had that tent city going on because they didn't want to go to the shelters. They couldn't drink or do any drugs in those. Not saying that they're all drinking or doing drugs, but.
Okay. Anything else, Councilor Hicks?
No, that's all.
Thank you. Okay, up next we have Councilor Henry.
Yes, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Can I know the address of this? I'd like to go look at it right now.
I believe the one that we were referring to is the one on 7th Street next to KNU Auto Parts, and that's the one I have seen. I don't recall one on 5th Street, but I do recall seeing one on 7th Street.
Mr. Mayor,
I did pass 5th Street, and I didn't see one on there, so I'm just real curious at what this place is, because I've never seen or heard of it, and some of the council members are making it sound like we have a mini chop over there or something. I don't think that's the case.
And Councilor Farmer.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I apologize. It is 7th Street, not 5th Street.
Okay, that's the one.
7th and what was the other street?
7th, right across the street from the old Seattle First Bank, right next to KNU Auto Parts.
Okay. I don't know the name of that street, so.
Yeah, at 7th Street, I'm not quite sure what the intersection is, but my city manager, you know what streets are around it?
It would be Decatur and Edison, between Decatur and Edison on 7th.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Henry, anything further? Any questions, comments?
Nope, that's it. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilor Broersma.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have just within the last 30 seconds received my third call in the last week complaining about what's going on. And these are adjacent property owners, people who have expressed discomfort with going out to empty their trash, to use the backside of their business, to go in their parking areas. You know, all of that being said, we have to remember what our attorneys have said, that essentially it's not illegal to be homeless, but at the same time, people are feeling uncomfortable. There's human feces there. I mean, they're relieving themselves on adjacent property. I drove by today to take a look, and I would encourage others to drive by and take a look if you haven't done that yet. I saw a number of cars parked in the back, and then people had set up deck chairs and shopping carts, and they claimed all the parking spots. And it was like, you know, this is public parking for our community, and yet they have occupied those spaces and claimed them for themselves. We do need to find a solution to this problem. And I understand people don't necessarily want to go to a shelter. They don't always want to go to a hotel because the rules are more than they want to have to contend with. But it is, as Mr. Farmer said, it's turning into a real problem. It was one thing when there was one car there, but now we've got several, and we've got a fair number of people who are staying there. And I worry about their safety, and I worry about the safety and security of the people who own businesses and own property around there.
Thank you. So I guess maybe a question for I'm not sure that city attorneys have an answer for this or not, or maybe the city manager, but having like a limit on how long the vehicle can be there. I know one of the things that got brought up was the fact that they're not licensed, and I have seen some vehicles with, you know, like jacks that they're going to change the tire, for example, but it doesn't seem like those vehicles have moved. It started with just one vehicle a while back, and now it seems like we have about 3 or 4, if I'm not mistaken, last time I drove by there. So is there a way for us to put like a parking limit, and that way at least the vehicle is drivable and they can move to other areas and not necessarily get into legal trouble by, you know, punishing them because they're homeless, but more like trying to have a clean and safe environment, as everyone has said? Is that something maybe the city managers or attorneys can look into, or they know an answer of?
So I'll provide a partial response and then invite the attorneys to kind of elaborate. And also offer quick clarification. I did want to make sure Council understood and was aware. On May 5th of this year, the Washington State Court of Appeals did issue their decision in that Seattle case. It went from Superior Court, but the Court of Appeals did rule on it on May 5th and affirmed that the state's Homestead Act does apply to a local government effort to tow vehicles in which homeless people reside. Now, it could still be appealed by the city of Seattle to the state Supreme Court, but as a result, that now does apply all across Division 1 of the Court of Appeals. So just quick clarification on that point. But that goes to then the enforcement mechanisms that are currently embedded in Sunnyside Municipal Code related to vehicles and parking. And part of what complicates it a little bit is there's actually 2 potential enforcement mechanisms, each of which may intersect with some of this current case law. In Chapter 8.32, we have the Administrative Enforcement Code for a variety of code enforcement activities. Under that code, we can issue a citation. The citation can then be appealed to essentially a hearings examiner. The hearings examiner then can rule, and then that can be appealed ultimately to the city manager. While all of that is underway, and until the final decision, that might then result in an order to have a vehicle towed or impounded. However, under this current evolving case law, if we do impound the vehicles, then it appears that we would then be obligated to essentially immediately return them to the owners at no charge. We would not be able to charge an impoundment fee or anything under the homestead decision because that would be considered a lien. And we'd start the cycle all over again. In addition, under Chapter 10.08, our parking chapter, there is a mechanism there that says in basic public parking areas where there's no other time zone, we do have some time zone limited parking spaces out on the street. There are certain zones that were designated for 15-minute or 30-minute parking zones to, increase movement of vehicles around so that people didn't block a business parking space for, hours and hours. But in the public parking lots, where there's no other code limitation other than the vehicle is supposed to be moved at least once every 24 hours. There, though, in Chapter 10, the enforcement mechanism involves taking a case to municipal court. And if the judge orders, judge can then impose a fine. The judge can order the vehicle be moved or impounded. But again, that runs into the nuances of how that now intersects with if the this new case law. And so that's part of why we felt this was an important conversation to bring to council, and why it was it was important that it be raised and vetted. Is there are some tools available to us, some structures available to us, but we need to kind of get a sense of direction, the direction, and we do share a sense of urgency around this. But we may need to make some refinements to either or both of these ordinances in order to pass legal muster going forward. And with that, I'll kind of turn it over to Jessica and Eric to elaborate on anything else they see that would be important for council to understand about their research.
From my perspective, you really hit all of the key points. That there are provisions in the city municipal code that would affect this, but it's really difficult to enforce it given the Homestead Act. Eric, do you have anything else to add?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Eric. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, just a couple of little nuances there, and I know I'll try to keep from turning this into a legal seminar to keep everybody awake. But essentially, what it comes down to is the case, the things that are going on. We're starting to see a trend with regard to the case law. I think that's really kind of the thing that we want to make sure that we impart. But I do want to also kind of pump the brakes a little bit in terms of the cases that we're seeing out here. I mean, we do have the Martin v. Boise case, but I do want to be clear that while that case is a Ninth Circuit case, it does currently apply to us in the Ninth Circuit. There's a couple of issues with it. One, the city of Boise had an outright ban on sleeping anywhere in public places, in public, which included right-of-ways, city parks. So essentially, what it is a little more narrow than I think a lot of times people, especially folks who are who really want advocacy for homeless and that's really much more of what the that goal is. It is oftentimes kind of misquoted in the sense that it basically just says that in a narrower sense, if you cannot ban outright sleeping outdoors everywhere in the city, within the city's city facilities, any city property, which would include right-of-ways, parks, those types of things. So it doesn't allow people necessarily to camp, to set up a camp on city property. It doesn't allow them. It doesn't allow you to prevent people from being in certain locations to even sleep. So it is. But we also want to be clear in saying that this is definitely the way the trend is starting to move towards. So there is a little bit of an issue. That the other part of it is that Martin v. Boise is binding on us because it's Ninth Circuit, and we're obviously in the Ninth Circuit. It went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they were denied certiorari, which is just a fancy way for saying, hey, this is no longer this is moot because the city of Boise isn't even enforcing this ordinance anymore. So we're not going to take this up and review this since it's moot. So certiorari was denied. And so we don't actually have a Supreme Court decision on this. We do have a binding Ninth Circuit. The other part that I would just also throw in is, while we do have this Homestead Act situation with regard to Division 1 in King County and Seattle and in King County, obviously, we're in Division 3, and so even though that's a Court of Appeals decision, that wouldn't necessarily be binding on us. Now, as you folks probably all are aware, though, Court of Appeals decisions do get pretty good deference, even from the other divisions. So we do want to pay attention to that, and even though it wouldn't be legally binding on us, we do want to pay attention to that and say that that's out there as well. So. Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to throw those things there. Hopefully that doesn't muddy the water more than it kind of already is. But essentially, there are, the city still has some tools to be able to do this. And I think that's what Mr. Casey was really kind of going over, is that we've already got a good, it sounds like a good framework to kind of start with. But at the same time, if we can tweak a few things with our code and really be ahead of the curve on this, and make sure that we're balancing both those interests of folks that definitely have their, as Mr. Farmer said, their constitutional rights to be involved in commerce and not have that impeded, and to be able to have citizens who are paying for things be able to have those used the way that they choose to have those. So yeah, I think there's it sounds like there's still plenty of room in there for folks to really kind of figure out where they are on that scale. But yeah, there are some new things that we didn't have when our code was originally drafted. So I guess that's all I would say.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I might like to invite Eric or Jessica to, if they have any knowledge or understanding. I think Deputy Mayor Stremler raised an important observation around the fact that there are shelter facilities available in adjacent communities in Toppenish and Yakima, and does the existence of those shelter spaces comport with the Martin v. Boise ruling in a way that would allow us to proceed with our own enforcement action on the basis that there are shelter beds available within the county? Do Eric or Jessica, do you have any insight as to how the courts might treat that situation?
Sure. Yeah. So
go ahead, Eric.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's a good question. It's a tricky one because the ruling says that you must have a meaningful alternative. And because this was only decided in 2018, this hasn't been able to be litigated a whole lot. So I'm not sure if meaningful alternative has been narrowly defined yet. Eric?
No, that's kind of what I was going to get at, which is that Boise is limited in the sense that what they ruled is that there was no meaningful alternative in Boise. So would that mean that if there's two cities, that was kind of one of the issues that started coming up in some of the seminars when people were trying to figure out how to be ahead of the curve on this, was, well, would it matter if you were in Seattle and let's say you were in the north part of Seattle, which was bordering on Shoreline, and yet there was bed space in Shoreline, but there wasn't in downtown Seattle? Obviously, one of those would be more meaningful to you if you didn't have transportation versus the other. So yeah, I think that's absolutely right, is that there is no clear answer, but it's maybe one of those things that ends up getting defined by something it's not. in the sense that as long as it's not too far away or it's not impractical to be able to use, then you should be able to pass that. But at the same time, really what it comes down to, I think there's been a lot of talk about folks thought that this was a decision that said that local governments had to now provide encampments, and that's not accurate. That's certainly not accurate based on the reading of the case. It doesn't put any kind of particular responsibility on the government entity to provide that space. It just can't prohibit it in all locations throughout the city. So that's a much different proposition than saying that you are somehow required to provide a lot to allow a homeless encampment or for folks that are homeless. While you can't criminalize homelessness, you certainly aren't required to spend any certain amount of funds or resources to alleviate the situation as well. So that little nuance.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. My question is for Eric Ferguson. Eric, in regards to Martin v. Boise, did the court use the word homeless individuals in its jurisdiction in paragraph 2? Did it say in its jurisdiction?
I don't recall.
Are you paraphrasing?
Yeah, no, I don't recall if they limited it to its jurisdiction. I think that was kind of the problem, was that might not actually hold up, because even if you say in particular one part of the city, that was kind of the analysis. People were saying, well, what about in East LA? You may have access to facilities there, but yet, if you were somewhere down by Orange County or something like that, that would not be meaningful. So even if it was in your jurisdiction, that might not pass the muster. So, but no, I can't recall that exact language.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. City Manager, I guess maybe for the city attorneys, obviously that impound and return, that might be even a tool that we could potentially look at if there is a way to let them know that the vehicle's going to get potentially impounded. And if they don't move it, then maybe they might be interested in getting the vehicle repaired if it's not in driving conditions. And if it does get impounded, at that point it will get returned, but it will get returned at the impound lot. And at that point, they would have to either get it repaired to move it back into whatever the location they had it. And maybe they won't park in the same spot at that point. They will think twice about leaving a vehicle that is not in running conditions. Is that something we can potentially look at?
I believe so, sir. We're, to our knowledge, there's a mix of drivable and non-drivable vehicles, and in fact, it's my understanding that at least in a few instances, they used the drivable vehicles to tow one or two of the non-drivable vehicles onto the site. As we outlined, the city's code provides an incremental sequence of steps that we have to follow in order to get to impounding, but we can take those steps. Certainly, some of the other conditions that have been described would warrant or enable us to have a basis for doing that. The chance that they might then return to the same lot, is a possibility, but as you say, they may also choose to relocate somewhere else. The mechanism, I'll point out simply just for recognizing that it's a consideration, not necessarily a barrier. Part of the reason that the city imposed fees and fines for this is to help the city recover its costs from these processes. There is a cost impact to the city for conducting an impound process and for working with the impound towing company and so forth. But I think, as several council members have rightly pointed out, there's the financial impact to the city occurring from the activity and its effect on local businesses, regardless. And so I simply note that, but I don't raise it as a concern or barrier to proceeding if we need to. And that's something that we can look at. I think part of the concern had been, as these cases continue to work their way through, making sure that we don't misstep, because as the attorneys have pointed out, our ordinances were written and their mechanisms were written before this case law was established, and we may need to make some tweaks to it, and that's in order to make sure that we take those steps in a legally defensible manner. But we can certainly start some of those, and I think, as Eric has said, we can certainly start some of those, it sounds like, with the framework that we have. Eric, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
No, I think I couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, thank you. Is there a council member who wants to speak for the second time, ask any questions or additional comments at this time?
Mr. Mayor, this is
Mayor.
Let's go ahead and start with Councilor Farmer at this time, since he spoke first.
Okay, I know Yakima has had this problem, and maybe not living in cars, but camping on public property. Have we looked at any of the things that they have done to help alleviate the problem? I know they're not living in cars, but they're still living on public property. I don't know if any of what they have done would help us at all in what we decide to do, but I know Yakima had a great problem with campers all over town. I'm just wondering if some of what they did we could incorporate here.
It sounds like that would be something that our city manager can research potentially, unless you have anything now, Mr. Casey.
I can share a few initial observations, and I'm certainly happy to follow up with Alex Meyerhoff to kind of see where they're at on some of these initiatives. But the city of Yakima has, I would say, a fairly mature infrastructure in place in terms of both public and nonprofit entities providing direct services to homeless individuals in the areas of behavioral and mental health, and in the areas of sheltering and services. And there are, for example, some faith-based organizations that are providing services. I know in some communities across the state, faith-based organizations are actually hosting homeless vehicle parking sites. So because there's actually federal protection for churches to do that sort of thing. And so Yakima has the advantage of a little bit more mature infrastructure around the services that allow them to refer and assist folks into more optimal locations than just simply being, encamped down by the river or something like that. Those are certainly things we can explore and perhaps look at potential partnerships in our own community. And happy to do more research on how they built that up over time, because obviously, they didn't all just spring up quickly. That has had to be built, and we certainly happy to bring back the information on some of the steps they started out with.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. And up next, I think we had Deputy Mayor who wanted us. Let's go ahead and give our Deputy Mayor a chance to speak, and then we'll go back to Councilor Farmer.
Okay, yeah. Can we start having the property owners around it, if they're on their property, have what I'm trying to think of here, not necessarily a restraining order, do not trespass order against them, or they're not allowed on their properties. And then the other thing is, I don't think it's legal for them to be doing drug deals. Could the city put up some surveillance cameras and have the PD check them every once in a while and go back and review it? If they see drug deals and they can identify the person, go back and do a search or whatever. But I would think that there's things we can do. We just aren't doing them. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor Stramler. Anyone else wants to speak for a second time before I go back? Okay, Councilor Farmer, go right ahead.
Okay, some of my comments just piggyback on the Ron's comments. Lights and cameras. Lights are one of the biggest deterrents in theft and illegal activities as anything in the world. Is there any way that we can put up some lights that will make this thing daylight, day and night? And along the same line, put the cameras up. And then I know our police department is overworked, but what does it take to drive by as they're out driving around in town? What does it take for as far as time to drive through that parking lot several times a day, several times a night, and just keep an eye on it that way? I think if they know that we've got police cars driving through there at any particular time, it might stop some of this problem.
Okay, thank you for everyone for their comments and input on this. And I think our city manager and attorneys have some homework to do, and come back to us with some options or some changes to our ordinance, and we could definitely discuss further at that time. Any last comments, Mr. Casey?
Just want to thank council for the discussion and suggestions. I know many of these items, to some degree or another, we have actually put in place to some degree. I know that code enforcement, as one avenue, has been out there repeatedly over the last several weeks. We get some short-term improvement and then some backsliding, so we're continuing to work on that. I also was informed that PD had begun increasing their kind of patrols through that area after we received reports of increased criminal activity. I'm not aware that they have observed or been able to take action on anything to date, but we'll continue to look at that as possible. And then the suggestions around some infrastructure improvements, lighting, potential cameras, or other steps that we could take in that arena. We'll take that back with Public Works and ask them to work up some ideas and possible estimates on that as well. So, and of course, obviously the legal. So a lot of good feedback to kind of help us move forward, and appreciate the dialogue.
All right, thank you very much for everyone's participation on that discussion item. So at this point, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is going to be our 6-year transportation improvement program. And again, this is for discussion only. Mr. City Manager.
Apologies, I had muted myself again. Every year, we are required under state transportation planning laws and rules to bring to council an update or refresh on our transportation improvement plan. It's kind of a rolling 6-year plan where we look out ahead into planned transportation improvements. The projects are developed in collaboration between our contracted city engineering firm, HLA, and the staff in Public Works. In both 2018 and 2019, council adopted rolling plans that brought forward about a half dozen different projects. The 2020 update does not actually change or add or delete any of the projects that were approved in 2019. It's primarily a refresh of some of the information and estimates associated with that. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Public Works Director Fisher to kind of walk you through the projects in the plan and answer any questions that council may have about it. This is for discussion tonight, and then the next steps going forward will be we're required to hold a public hearing, which we'll propose to conduct at our next meeting on July 13th, and then council action following the public hearing. Sorry about that. Mr. Fisher, anything you'd want to add?
No, I'm just going to go through the projects. You did a great job of summarizing it. So no, I was just going to move through these projects one at a time, which I know is a little different format than what we've done in the past, but felt that there was a good opportunity here with this workshop to actually walk through each project. And I also included some maps, which we've never done before. I just thought it would help to have some visual aids. And I can walk through these. And so what I'll do is I'll walk through the first project here, which is the 6th Street Improvement Project. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll open it up for questions on that project specifically, as opposed to me going through all 9 projects and then trying to fill the questions at the very end. So with that, the very first
Shane, real quick, can I jump in?
Sure.
Sorry, Shane. I just wanted to, I just didn't know if Martin wanted Jessica and I to hang around and go through the 9 projects.
No.
I'm sorry, unless council has further need of the city attorney, I'm happy to excuse them.
I'd be happy to stay and listen to Shane's projects though, but I just didn't want you guys to feel like we were hanging around.
Mayor Guerrero, I think you're muted.
Yes, thank you. I guess we all have those moments. And yes, I believe we are okay to have them excused. Instead, I don't think we'll have any more questions for them with this agenda item.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, Mr. Fisher, back to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the first project here is the 6th Street Improvement Project, and the project limits are Avenue to Decatur Avenue on 6th Street. And the plan for this project is to reconstruct the roadway, new asphalt, curb gutter, sidewalk, street lighting, storm drainage, landscaping, irrigation. It's basically the same thing as we've done downtown. Of course, we are going to meet Wednesday, me and Mr. Casey and HOA to talk about this project and some of the bulb outs and whatnot that the downtown project has. And we'll take a look at this project and make sure we're not building the same thing we have downtown that's going to make it cumbersome for vehicles to negotiate that. This project currently is set at $3.48 million. We're going to keep this STIP project the way it is currently until we have those discussions. And it probably won't be until the end of this year when we have an opportunity to amend it. We may come back to you guys at a later date at that time and talk about amending this TIP, which we do through YV-COG, through that relationship. So is there any questions on this particular project from council?
Councilors, I won't go down the list. If somebody wants to bring up a question, we could definitely go that route. If we get a lot of questions, then we'll go on a list item instead of all of us trying to speak over each other. So anyone wants to have any questions for Shane on this item?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Shane, does this update take into account the revised transportation revenue forecast issued by WashDOT on June 17th that affects statewide transportation programs?
We didn't make any adjustments at all, Councilor Rasucci. We just left them as they are, and we were going to kind of wait and see what that looks like as far as those restrictions and how that's spelled out. So we didn't make any adjustments to these. We just left them as they were until we had a little bit better direction on that. Then we'll make adjustments and amendments as we need to.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Mr. Mayor, for council's edification, the State Transportation Commission will be holding a special meeting tomorrow, July 7th at 9 a.m., broadcast statewide via TVW to receive that transportation revenue forecast and to see exactly where the state sits. This will be the first forecast since the COVID-19 pandemic hit Washington State, and we're already expecting to see huge decreases in numbers.
Thank you for that information. Appreciate it. Any additional questions on this first project? Sounds like we're okay, Shane. I'm going to move forward.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
We'll
if I might, sure.
Sure.
Shane, Sorry, if
Yes.
City Manager, just a quick observation. This format, obviously, we're going project by project, but I also wanted to just remind council that part of HLA's plan and direction with this, and part of what we've been trying to achieve as staff, is you'll see that one of the common threads in many of these projects is moving up the important transportation corridor improvements that the city's already put into place, but to make sure that the gateways and the entryways and the routes that are critical for commerce in the city are well maintained, are flowing well, and kind of inviting and drawing people in both from the freeways and into the core of downtown and into our core industrial area. And so each project stands alone for its own needs and requirements, but they also contribute to the broader goal of promoting greater transportation efficiency and economic development in the city. So I'll turn it back over to Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. Okay, second project we have here is the Yakima Valley Highway resurfacing. And this project is a grind and overlay of Yakima Valley Highway. And actually the map here I misdrew. The actual limits of the project go from McDonald's down to Pizza Hut. We've already ground down and resurfaced both of the ends of YVH. We just need that middle piece that we still need to get done. So we're looking at about 1,100 feet of well, let's look at this. Hold on, let me back up here. Yeah, it calls out for 1,100 feet east of Edison Avenue and Lincoln Avenue. And I think it's a little bit longer than that. Anyway, roughly the project's about $550,000. It's slated to phase in 2021 or 2022. Of course, that's pending, funding and availability. That one's a really straightforward project. I can take any questions.
Council members, any questions on this project? Okay, doesn't sound like we have any. We can move on to the next one, Shane.
Okay. Third project here is Midvale Road reconstruction. This is the one that we've been kicking around for a couple of years now. Everybody on council is aware of this. Basically, this is a grind and overlay from the on-ramp, off-ramp at 82 all the way down to Duffy Road. And basically, this is a grind and overlay of the travel lanes. The north and southbound lanes will be full grind out and replaced, and then the center turn lane would be ground down about 2 inches, basically through the first layer of asphalt of the original roadway, and then overlaid. And the reason why we didn't do a full grind in the center turn lane is because that lane isn't as heavily traveled, obviously, as the north and southbound lanes, which, as we all know, are in pretty bad shape. So we're able to rehab, the center turn lanes and the shoulders as best we can, but the drive lanes need to be fully ground out and replaced. This project we're really is pending. We've got our TBD and the sales tax that's on the agenda, or on the ballot this year in August, actually next month. It really is going to kind of determine that project and how we get that built. We're actually looking at a 2021 program as far as engineering, and then 2022-23 to get the work done itself. And with that, I can answer any questions.
Council members, questions on this project? Okay, sounds like we can move on to our next one.
Okay, next project here we have is the 9th Street and Edison Avenue intersection project. And this project, we know this intersection is problematic. It's tough, for cars making turning movements. There's just a lot going on there. The Veterans Plaza creates a few challenges for us. We have talked about the some sort of a traffic circle or a roundabout, or actually putting a signal in there. So there's been various things we've talked about, and those things have been discussed with HLA, and we just haven't really come to a good plan on that project yet as far as what we want to do. But we still leave it under 6-year TIP. We want it to be, we do come up with a good idea. We do want it to be part of this program and be ready to go when we make that decision. This project's about $700,000. They have it slated in there as, I think that is $690,000 is actually planning to put a light in, and that was kind of the preliminary plan for that, was to signal that. But like I said a second ago, there are other options for us. We just need to find what's going to fit best for that location. And with that, I can answer any questions.
Councilmembers, any questions on this project? Okay, sounds like we're okay to move on to the next one.
Pretty quiet. Okay, next project we have here is Grandview Avenue improvements, and this is a massive project. It is, and basically this is a grind and overlay of Grandview Avenue, basically starting at Rossier and go all the way down to Swan Road. Now it does talk about a little bit in here about doing some curb gutter sidewalks, storm drainage improvements. This road creates some challenges for us. There is some sidewalk and curb and gutter along there, but there are challenges as far as the relationship between the house and the road and storm drainage. The hill does not have any storm infrastructure, so there's very few pipes up on the hill to get the storm water down. The way the hill was built, 100 plus years ago, was built on bar ditches and culvert pipes, and that's kind of how the hill drains. Well, as time has gone on, some sidewalks have gone in, some curb has gone in, and it's created conveyance systems where the water now ends up in adjacent properties. So there's some challenges there with us, with HLA, and trying to figure out ways to get this project done that's not going to create huge headaches for storm runoff and potential erosion issues. This project's about $3 million, and I can answer any questions.
Council members, questions on this project? Shane, I have one question. Obviously, this street gets a lot of foot traffic from individuals walking and exercising that area. Obviously, having sidewalks will be extremely beneficial. And I know we talked about in the past of complete streets and having potential bike lanes and obviously making it safe for pedestrians. Is that something that is considered, even though it's not one of the main arterials coming into the city? It's more of a like side street in a sense? On
which street was it you mentioned?
Like Grandview Avenue, since that, I mean, is that considered like a main street type of thing? Or is that more of a neighborhood, I mean, residential area where it doesn't really need a bike lane or, more of the required items that are like on the downtown, like Yucca Valley Highway, for example?
Yeah, the bike lanes, if we would take these one at a time, bike lanes in a residential area, as narrow as that road is, when you put curb gutter sidewalk in, there's not really much room for bike lanes because you have so much on-street parking. So, and this is considered, obviously it's residential, but it is federally classified and classified in such a way that it does qualify to be on the 6-year TIP. But there are inherent challenges with trying to, obviously, like you say, the sidewalk is a great, pedestrian conveyance, but as far as bike lanes go, that's more like we have done on YVH. That's on both sides of the Yakima Valley Highway between 1st Street and 16th. We have bike lanes that go through there. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
It does. I was just kind of curious if that was going to be an option to consider there. Obviously, it makes sense if it's fairly narrow. We take up a bike street, then a bike lane, that's going to definitely make it even more narrow as it is. And if we have pedestrians out there, hopefully the sidewalks will be their main mode of transportation, which is ideal versus walking on the street. But yeah, that answers my question. Thank you, Shane.
Right, you bet.
Any additional questions on this project? Okay, we'll move on to our next project.
Next project is 16th Street improvements, and this is the roadway. This is a grind and overlay from Sun Valley Elementary all the way down to Scheller Road or North Avenue, depending on what side of 16th you're standing on. And basically, this section of road has been chewed into several times with the schools going in. Of course, the school did their part by putting the curb gutter sidewalk and a portion of the roadway on the east side of 16th. But at that time, the city did not require them to do a full roadway rebuild. And so the challenge we run into on this street is that obviously there's some ADA improvements that need to be done on the one corner of Beckner. Everything else is in compliance. But the challenge we run into is on the west side of the road, there's no curb and gutter. It's just a bar ditch of culvert pipes for driveways. And so if we did a grind and overlay out here, basically what we would do is we just grind out the existing road bed and just lay it back in and leave the west side of the road as it is. To install curb gutter sidewalk on that side of the road would probably triple this project number. So at this time, the plan is basically just to grind and overlay from Sun Valley Elementary down to North Avenue. With that, I can answer any questions.
Council members, questions on this one? Shane, I got one question. Any of the properties on the west side I know in the past we've done where we don't force them to build their sidewalk at the time, but in the future we have that right to have them build it out. Is that something any of those properties are basically indebted to the city with, the sidewalk itself?
The only one I'm aware of, Mayor, is the one on the corner of Beckner and 16th. You know, it's a relatively new house that was built there. That's the only one I'm aware of that has an agreement. And the reason why that agreement was put in place is because SCID has a huge delivery, and it used to be a weird box. Now I think it's a pressurized valve that sits right in the corner, and there's a huge power pole. And so it makes it difficult to get the ADA ramp and all the curb and gutter in there with those facilities. But that's the only one I'm aware of. There may be other ones up the street on the west side on 16th that have those agreements, but generally those agreements get put in place if, let's say, one of these houses were to burn down or they were to do a major remodel or tear it down and start over. That would trigger them to have to put in the frontage improvements. So unless there's something that triggers us to put that agreement in place, there's no mechanism for us just to put it in place, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you for the clarification.
You bet.
Any additional questions on this item, on this project? Shane, we're ready to move to the next one.
Okay, terrific. Next one here is Schoon Road. This is also a reconstructed roadway. One of the challenges we have with Schoon Road is underneath the road, and I think some of you are aware of this. There's about 12 to 14 inches of concrete because that's part of the Yellowstone Trail. So on the south end of the property down here on North Avenue, you see Roman Avenue as it comes in here. As that road, that radius in Roman Avenue turns, that's all that concrete that's in Roman Avenue follows Schoon Road to the north. And so pulling that concrete out of there is a major undertaking. And so that's part of the challenge we have on Schoon Road. The county, I don't know if you guys are aware, but a year or two ago, they had done an improvement coming down from the north, coming south, right to the city limits there by Mountain States. And they had a heck of a time. So that's part of the challenges with this project. We're working with HLA. We may be able to leave it in place. We don't know yet. We think it'd be more cost effective to leave it and just try to work around it as opposed to trying to to tear it out. But good project, needs to get done. The road's in pretty bad shape. We do have, I think, 1 or 2 curb gutter sidewalk agreements on that road that we could call on. I know Mountain States is gearing up right now to get their sidewalk in as we speak. So there's little pieces there that will help piece in some of the sidewalk portion of it that will help that the cost sharing to the city. And with that, I can answer any questions.
Council members, questions on this project? Okay. No questions. Shane, ready for the next one? If unless that's the last one.
And this is kind of, okay, so this is the citywide ADA ramps, and just there was no map associated with this because you wouldn't be able to read it. And basically what these ADA ramps are, this isn't ADA ramps on every single corner and intersection. These ADA ramps are only on the federally classified roads that qualify to be on the 6-year tip. So that would be along Edison, Lincoln, 16th, 9th, just those roads that are the major and minor arterials. And so basically we've got a bunch of ADA ramps that need to get done. And I've been talking with HLA. We're looking at trying to see if we can find some funding and try to knock out, 4 or 5 intersections here in the next, couple of years. So like Councilor Rasucci said, funding is going to get tight here pretty soon. We all see it coming. So that's just going to further delay trying to get some of these upgrades done. But we'll keep plugging along at it. So with that, I can answer any questions.
Council members, questions on this project? Okay, no questions, Shane, go ahead.
The next project we have here is the South 6th Street improvements. So this is 6th Street on the other side of the downtown area. So this takes us basically from Franklin Avenue down to Lincoln. And really this is very similar to the 6th Street, the North 6th Street, which was North Avenue to Decatur. It's all the same, basically looking at replacing the roadway, new asphalt, curb gutter sidewalk, storm drainage, and street lighting. This is another project that we've had on there for several years. It's a big project, $4.2 million. It's the largest project we have on this list. Anyway, it's not slated to go to probably 2025, 2026, maybe even longer out than that. With that, I can answer any questions.
Council members, questions on this project? No questions? Okay. Shane?
Okay. Well, that's all I had on that.
Shane, just on the overall project, I have one question. Obviously, these all require some local match dollars, and do most of them have an option for us to use some of our enterprise funds to do, if we're gonna dig up to do water lines or sewer lines or anything like that? Is there anything planned for any of these projects?
Yeah, and I apologize for not bringing that up. That's a great question. So the projects that I mentioned that are a grind and overlay do not qualify for, because they won't pay for any infrastructure anyway. But generally, you do a grind and overlay, you're not digging up the entire roadway and trying to get in the ground. You're just grinding off the first couple inches of asphalt and overlaying it. Now, the 6th Street projects, we talked about the North Avenue to Decatur, and then from Franklin to Lincoln. Those are both full rebuilds. So those would allow us to use our enterprise funds to help offset the match requirement. So anything we're doing where we're doing full reconstruct of the 9 projects I just mentioned do afford us the option to use enterprise funds.
Thank you for that clarification on that one.
You bet.
Okay, Mr. City Manager, anything you want to add to this agenda item?
No, thank you, sir. Shane did a good job walking us through them.
Mr. Mayor, I have one question for Shane.
Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Shane, on the projects that are requiring full rebuilds, how many of those that we identify that are basically because we pushed it too long and now it has to be rebuilt?
You know, I don't really see that. We've you know, up until the last, 7 or 8 years, we've done such an outstanding job, our streets department, with our chip sealing and crack filling, which really is a preservation program that helps lengthen the viability of the roadway. So we've done very well there. We are seeing the effects now of not doing chip seal every year. We've skipped. We're probably 7 or 8 years out of the last 15 that we have foregone chip sealing. So it's a great question, and that does affect it. The ones that are currently on the 6-year tip, I can't say for sure that those wouldn't be, had we done chip seal, every year for the last 15 years that I've been here, would those roadways still be up for construction and be on the 6-year tip? I'd say probably, because they are very old roads, and some of these roads were farm county roads that basically don't really have any base rock under them. They're just a shot road, which basically means they lay down oil and rock, and then they just keep laying rock and laying oil, laying rock, laying oil until they build up the roadway. Some of those roads, believe it or not, are still in existence, and they're still holding up, and I attribute that to the chip seal program. So, but to answer your question, Councilor Stucci, I can't say for sure that the list would be any different.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the comment.
You bet.
Okay, so we will move on to our next agenda item unless councilors have specific questions or questions in general for this 6-year transportation improvement program. Okay, hearing no additional questions, we'll move on to our upcoming council meetings with Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What you see in front of you, or what's up on the screen for most, is we have July 13, July 17 meetings pretty well filled up. On July 13th, we have the pleasure of introducing a proclamation honoring the Scout Me In Day coming up at the end of the month. Folks may recall that Nancy Leahy, who for many years served on the Astria Foundation and helped coordinate, for example, the Festival of Trees, she now works with Boy Scouts of America in the region, and she is helping coordinate this event. So we're looking forward to that coming up at the end of July. On the action agenda, we'll conduct a public hearing on the Transportation Improvement Plan you just heard the briefing about, and then bring it to council for potential action on adopting that Transportation Improvement Plan. We next have an ordinance that's currently being prepared by Kerr Law Group. This is in response to some research that was done related to an action actually taken by council in 2015. The Jerry Taylor Memorial Veterans Plaza, which has been a stellar project in Sunnyside for several years now, and a hallmark of kind of the downtown corridor. The American Legion Post took the step of donating that to the city in 2015. State law requires that council accept that donation in the form of an ordinance. The action taken in 2015 was actually done by a resolution, and it was not published in the paper. Small step, easily corrected, and so the intent is to bring that back to council to affirm your prior action accepting the donation of the Veterans Plaza. Following that, the American Legion Post has resubmitted an application for consideration of receiving lodging tax funds. They presented this to the LTAC committee last week, right before the holiday. The LTAC had previously denied the application for 2019 because of concern or uncertainty about the legal status of the ownership of the plaza, whether it met the criteria. Now that we have a path forward for clarifying and resolving that, the Post is seeking council's consideration of funding further improvements. So we'll have all of those items ready for council's consideration. Next is Department of Ecology and Airport Cleanup Grant. This is something that Director Fisher will talk further about next week. And I don't have a whole lot of detail on that one. And then at the moment, but then finally, Finance Director Alba will be providing kind of a 6-month budget update, what we're seeing in terms of revenues and expenditures year to date, taking into consideration some of the effects that we're already seeing from the economic disruption due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the steps that staff have been taking to keep tight control of our spending. And also for council's information, I don't have it on here yet, but I do need to make a call this week. We have a real estate matter that is an active real estate matter under consideration, and the current agreement expires, or the feasibility period for that agreement expires in mid-July, and I am trying to get an update from our real estate agent on the status of that. And so if we have information, I may be bringing that to you on your July 13th meeting. July 27th, a little bit shorter agenda. Finance will be presenting a second quarter budget amendment, building in part on the budget update. Depending on where we're at, very excited that we're in now phase 1.5 of the reopening plan, but it does appear that the county's path forward in reopening under the 4-phase process may take us a little more than the month of July to get through. And so starting to work with the city attorney on an appropriate update to the emergency proclamation extension to authorize any necessary adjustments to city operations or council conduct during this time. We'll be working to bring that to you at the end of July. And then new planning supervisor, Mike Shuttleworth, is bringing forward annexation ordinance on a parcel. This has been through all of the steps up until now, planning commission and so forth. And so he's working on scheduling a planning commission meeting mid-month, but we'll have this annexation proposal for council's consideration at the end of July, and we'll have some more information on that for you in advance of that meeting. At this time, we haven't slotted particular topics into the regular meetings in August. The August 3rd workshop is kind of an open item at this time. We're just starting to think about how do we conduct a budgeting kickoff. It's time. It's coming up very soon for us to get started on the 21 budget process, and we usually do that at an off-site workshop on a weekend. We may do, but in light of where we're at with COVID and the ability to hold meetings, we may break that up a little bit this year. So we're kind of looking at that. And obviously there's other items that we're looking out into the more distant future for, but that's what we have coming up for you in the near term. Happy to answer any questions if council wishes.
Council members, any questions or any items you want to add to our future agenda meetings? Okay, if you do think of some, please let our city manager, Jackie, or myself know, and we'll get them on there for you guys and get some information back if that's the purpose of it. Up next, I think that's the last thing we have on our agenda for tonight. Anything else, Mr. City Manager, before we call for an adjournment?
No, thank you, sir. I have nothing further.
Okay, unless there's an objection, we're gonna head call this meeting to adjourn. There being no further business to come before council, and without objection, I adjourn this meeting at 7:54 p.m.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening, and we'll see you guys at the next meeting.
Sounds good. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Not all.